Chandler is single. His aunt Meredith may be his dependent. Chandler and Meredith did not live together in 2024. Chandler pays more than 50% of the cost of maintaining his home and of Meredith's home, as well as more than 50% of Meredith's support. Meredith had $3,500 of gross income. Does Meredith qualify as Chandler's dependent? Yes, she passes all the requirements for qualifying relative. Does Meredith qualify Chandler for the head of household filing status? No, she did not live with Chandler more than 6 months. Meredith is Chandler's qualifying relative dependent, but he cannot file using the head of household filing status. What filing status will he use? Single. Will Chandler still be able to claim Meredith as his qualifying relative dependent, even though he has to use the single filing status? Yes, a taxpayer using the single filing status can have dependents. IRS Publication 17 has a chart that spells out the exceptions. It is on page 26, Table 2-1. Publication 17 is an asset that can be used with a client sitting at your desk if you need to look something up. Let's now turn our attention to the qualifying relative exceptions. Claiming a dependent because of a multiple support agreement does not qualify the taxpayer to file as head of household. Why do you think the multiple support agreement does not qualify the taxpayer to file as head of household? The multiple support agreement means multiple people are involved in the support of that person. It is an exception to the rules for qualifying relative, but not head of household. For head of household, the taxpayer must provide more than 50% of a qualifying relative's support. The final exception is a non-resident alien taxpayer for any part of the tax year may not file as head of household. It's now time for the next check for understanding question. Michelle is married to Brian, but has not seen or spoken to him for 15 years. Without knowing more facts, which of the following filing statuses can be ruled out for Michelle to use? Single. Married filing separately. Married filing jointly. Head of household. Pause a moment to think about it. Did you know the answer is single? Nice work. Single is correct because Michelle is married, so she has no option to use the single filing status. If she were to legally separate or divorce her husband by December 31st, she would then be unmarried and could file single. If she met all the requirements for filing as head of household, that would be another option. Let's take a deeper look at why B, C, and D are possible options for Michelle. Married filing separately is incorrect because Michelle could file married filing separately if she did not qualify for head of household or married filing jointly filing statuses. Married filing jointly is incorrect because even though she has not spoken to him for 15 years, she could still file married filing jointly with him if they both chose to do so. This is, of course, assuming she can get in touch with him. Is it me, or are you also wondering why they haven't spoken in 15 years? Head of household is incorrect because depending on her situation, she may have a qualifying person and also be considered married, but considered unmarried for tax purposes, and be able to use the head of household filing status. This will be covered in more detail later today. Nice job on that one. We've saved the best for last. Imagine a married taxpayer comes to you for advice. They have not seen or heard from their spouse all year. They've been told they have to file married filing jointly or married filing separately. They can't file jointly because they don't know where their spouse is. They've heard married filing separately might cause them to lose some credits or pay more tax. Is there anything we can do to help this client? Yes, they could be considered married, but unmarried for tax purposes. Before we get into the specifics, let's think about the why. Why would a married taxpayer want to be considered unmarried for tax purposes? Well, number one is to qualify as head of household. Number two, the threshold amount of taxable income differs for each filing status and is lower for married filing separately, resulting in potential higher taxes. Number three, some credits are reduced or unavailable to taxpayers using the married filing separately status. Those credits are covered in other chapters. And number four, if a married taxpayer files a separate return and their spouse itemizes, they cannot claim the standard deduction, possibly resulting in higher total tax. Let's look at the benefits of head of household compared to married filing separately. The top table is from Publication 17, page 96, and shows the standard deduction for each filing status. What is the standard deduction for single or married filing separately? $14,600. Now, what is the standard deduction for head of household? $21,900. Someone do the math. By how much more do you get to lower taxable income If you use head of household instead of single or married filing separately, $7,300. Bingo! That's a good chunk of change. Now look at the tax tables. This also can be found in Publication 17, which filing status pays the least amount of tax for each income range. Married filing jointly or qualifying surviving spouse. Now, which status has the next lowest amount of tax? Head of household. Generally, single and married filing separately have the highest amounts of tax. If a taxpayer can qualify for head of household instead of married filing separately, they will have a higher standard deduction and generally pay less tax on the same income. So now we understand why our married client may benefit from being considered unmarried for tax purposes. Let's find out how the taxpayer would qualify for head of household using this rule. In the participant's guide in the head of household married, but considered unmarried for tax purposes section, it lists how one can be considered unmarried for tax purposes and ultimately use the head of household filing status. What are the correct requirements to be considered unmarried for tax purposes? Let's find out. The first requirement is to file a separate return from their spouse. For the second requirement listed, there are specific types of dependents that qualify. Could it be a niece or nephew? No, it could not be a niece or nephew. Which dependents do qualify for this requirement? The dependent must be their dependent son, daughter, including adopted and step, or eligible foster child. This also includes a child who would be a dependent except for the divorced and separated parents rules, which we will cover shortly. Remember those blinders I keep talking about? This is another time you want to remain very focused. If you are looking at the head of household filing status, the first thing you need to know is if the taxpayer is married. Your questions and follow-up will be different if they are married than if they are not married. When you hear married, little bells should ring in your head. Do they qualify for married filing jointly or married filing separately? Do they qualify for head of household? One must focus on the requirements for married, but considered unmarried for tax purposes, to consider the head of household filing status for that taxpayer. If the taxpayer is not married, then the type of dependent living in their home does not have to be their child in order to qualify them for head of household. It could be a niece, nephew, or even grandparent. Again, focus on what is in front of you. The rules are different. You will run into this concept over and over again when you prepare taxes. You have to learn how to look at these situations and narrow your focus, specifically one tax subject at a time. The last one here states that the taxpayer must not have lived with their spouse during the last 6 months of the year. When I say this, it's important to know how strict this requirement is. This means the taxpayer cannot even spend one night with their spouse in the same household in the last 6 months of the year. Lucky for us, there is a flowchart of sorts provided in the participant's guide. There must be a qualifying child or qualifying relative that fits the very narrow qualifications for head of household when the taxpayer is married. First, focus is whether the child is a dependent. One focuses on the dependency rules for that. Once dependency is established, focus on filing status. Is the taxpayer married or unmarried? If married, you have to focus on married filing, jointly filing status, married filing separately, or head of household filing status for married, considered unmarried rules. If the taxpayer is unmarried, you have to focus on a whole different set of requirements listed here. Maybe they will use the single filing status, maybe they will qualify for head of household filing status. Use the charts and resources we are introducing in this course to help you focus. Eventually, it will become easier to remember, but there is nothing wrong with using reference material to help you. Why don't we look at some examples? Kathy is married. Her spouse, Jamie, moved out in August of 2024, and they are not filing a joint return. Their son, Wayne, is her qualifying child dependent. She lived together with Wayne for all of 2024. Kathy paid more than 50% of the cost of maintaining their home. Did Kathy provide more than half the cost of maintaining their home? Yes. Are Kathy and Jamie filing separate returns? Yes. Did Kathy and her spouse live in the same home at any time during the last 6 months of the year? Yes. Can Kathy file using the head of household filing status? No, she does not qualify because they lived together during the last 6 months of the year. If they had divorced in December, could she have filed using the head of household filing status? Yes. She would not have been married at the end of the year, so it would not matter that they lived together during the last 6 months. Let's look at the completed chart. Let's work through another example. Did Adelaide provide more than half the cost of maintaining their home? Yes. Are they filing separate returns? Yes. Did the taxpayer and spouse live in the same home at any time during the last 6 months of the year? No. Is Sky a qualifying person for Adelaide to be considered unmarried for tax purposes? Yes, she is her daughter and they live together for more than 6 months. Can Adelaide file using the head of household filing status? Yes, she does qualify. Let's look at the chart. Yes, Adelaide qualifies. Let's work through one more example. George is married. His wife Dot moved out in April of 2024. His 7-year-old grandson, Henry, is his qualifying child dependent. George and Henry lived together all of 2024. George pays more than 50% of the cost of maintaining their home. Did George provide more than half the cost of maintaining their home? Yes. Are George and Dot filing separate returns? The assumption is yes, since we are trying to determine if George could use the head of household filing status. Did George and his spouse live in the same home at any time during the last 6 months of the year? No. Is Henry a qualifying person for George to be considered unmarried for tax purposes? No. He does not meet the relationship of son, daughter, stepchild, or eligible foster child. Can George file using the head of household filing status? No. Since he is married, he does not qualify. His grandson does not meet the requirements for the relationship test when a taxpayer is married but considered unmarried. Let's look at the chart. If George hadn't been married, could he have filed using the head of household filing status? Yes, his grandson would qualify him for head of household filing status. Let's complete another check for understanding question. Remember Michelle from earlier? Let's take a closer look at her situation. Michelle is married to Brian, but has not seen or spoken to him for 15 years. Her 16-year-old daughter lived with her all year and did not provide more than 50% of her own support. Can Michelle file using the head of household filing status? Maybe. More information is needed. No, she is still married. Yes, she has a qualifying child. Yes, she is filing a separate return from her husband. Pause to think, then resume when you're ready for the answer. Did you know the answer was A? Dynamite. We need more information. In addition to having a qualifying person, we need to know if Michelle paid over half of the expenses of keeping up her home. Since she is married, we also need to know for certain if Michelle will be filing a separate return from her husband. Let's see why the other answers are incorrect. No, she is still married is incorrect because she may qualify for head of household if she meets the requirements for a married taxpayer to be considered unmarried for head of household purposes. Yes, she has a qualifying child is incorrect because we don't know if she meets the rest of the requirements, such as paying over half the costs of keeping up her home. Yes, she is filing a separate return from her husband is incorrect because this is only one of the requirements. We would still need to know if she paid over half the costs of keeping up her home. Thanks for a job well done. You're awesome. Next, we're going to talk about the costs of maintaining a home for the head of household filing status.